There comes a time in life when you start to question the role you've been playing in other people's lives. You begin to notice patterns. People call when they need you, text when it's convenient for them, drop by when it suits their mood, and suddenly a quiet thought settles into your mind. What would happen if you just stopped being available? Most of us have been taught to be reachable, to respond quickly, to say yes more often than no. There's a kind of pride attached to being dependable, but there's a cost hidden in that identity, a slow, almost invisible erosion of self. When you make yourself constantly available, you become a default option, not a priority, just the person who always picks up, always responds, always adjusts. But people don't value what's always within reach. They may appreciate it briefly, but they don't treasure it. It becomes background noise. And this is where things start to shift. When you pull back just a little, the silence you leave behind speaks louder than anything you ever said. One of the most interesting psychological principles here is the concept of scarcity. Studies show that people assign more value to things that are less available, not because they're rare in a material sense, but because their access is limited. You see this in everything from economics to human behavior. A person who doesn't answer their phone right away is sometimes seen as more important. A person who doesn't say yes all the time is perceived as having stronger boundaries, more self-worth. This isn't manipulation. It's about balance. It's about reminding people that your time and presence have value. Let's take a real example. There was a woman who had a group of friends she was always helping, rides to the airport, last-minute babysitting, talking through every breakup and drama. She never said no. She was proud of being the reliable one. But she began to feel drained. None of her friends asked how she was doing, not really. They assumed she was fine because she always showed up. One day, she decided to stop volunteering. She didn't make a scene, just stopped offering. And over the next few months, something interesting happened. Some friends disappeared, others got upset, but a few started reaching out in new ways, checking in, asking questions, respecting her time. Her relationships didn't fall apart, they just became clearer. The same thing happens in professional settings. Employees who are always available outside of work hours are less likely to get promotions, not because they're not hardworking, but because their value becomes invisible. They're taken for granted. A 2019 study by Harvard Business Review showed that people who set boundaries and didn't respond to work messages after hours were more likely to be seen as leaders, not less committed, more focused, more intentional. It turns out, presence is not the same as impact. Just being there all the time doesn't prove your worth. When you stop being available, you're not punishing others, you're protecting your energy. You start to realize how much of your life is spent managing other people's needs, emotions, and expectations. And if you've always been the go-to person, pulling back can feel uncomfortable. You might feel guilty. That's normal. But guilt is not always a sign you've done something wrong. Sometimes it's just a sign that you're breaking a pattern that needed to be broken. And here's another side of this. People grow when they are not constantly rescued. When you stop stepping in right away, others learn to solve their own problems. They become more independent, more thoughtful. You're not abandoning them, you're giving them space to become stronger. This applies to friendships, family, even romantic relationships. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that being constantly available to them isn't healthy for you or for them. Social media has made availability feel like a social obligation. People expect instant replies. If someone doesn't respond in a few hours, it's seen as rude or distant. But this kind of hyperconnectivity creates anxiety. You're not meant to be accessible 24/7. Constant communication doesn't mean better connection. In fact, it often leads to shallow interactions. When you step back, conversations become more meaningful. You have more to say because you've had time to think, to live, to breathe. There's also a deeper truth at play. Not everyone who has access to you deserves it. Over time, we accumulate people, Co-workers, acquaintances, old friends, and we continue to give them parts of ourselves out of habit. But attention is a currency, and just like money, where you spend it matters. When you stop being available to people who don't reciprocate, don't respect you, or drain your energy, you start creating room for the ones who do. There's an old saying, if you're always there for people, they stop checking if you're okay. And this isn't about self-pity, it's about awareness. You start noticing who checks in when you don't reach out first. Who listens when you speak, not just when they need a sounding board. That kind of clarity is both liberating and painful, but it's honest. There are those who might say that disappearing or pulling back is selfish. But is it selfish to want your time back, your peace, your attention? In a world that constantly demands access to your mind, your thoughts, your attention, reclaiming yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. Think of people who are admired and respected, mentors, leaders, creators. They're not the ones constantly available on demand. They're focused, selective. They don't say yes to everything because they're clear on what matters. And ironically, that's why people seek them out more. Their presence carries weight, not because they've built walls, but because they've built a life that isn't open to constant interruption. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It starts with small choices. Turning your phone off for a few hours, not answering emails after work, saying no without explaining yourself. These are small acts of rebellion in a world that measures worth by output and availability. But over time, they add up. You get your evenings back, your mornings, your weekends. You find yourself again in the quiet moments. You begin to understand something simple yet powerful. Availability is not love, it's not loyalty, it's not kindness. True connection doesn't require constant presence. It requires honesty, respect, and mutual effort. When someone really values you, they understand when you need space. They don't vanish because you stopped replying instantly. They stay because the bond isn't based on access, it's based on something deeper. Parents who never say no often raise children who don't understand boundaries. Employees who never disconnect burn out. Friends who are always on call start to feel invisible. The world doesn't teach you this because the world benefits from your constant availability. Your attention is monetized, your time is consumed, but your life is not a service. You don't owe it to everyone. To what really happens when you stop being available. The wrong people fade away. The right ones grow closer. You stop being tired all the time. You stop feeling resentful. You get more done. You think more clearly. You sleep better. You find yourself remembering things you used to love, hobbies, ideas, peace. And yes, it's uncomfortable at first. People will react. Some will test your boundaries. Others will guilt you. But the ones who matter will adapt. They'll respect you more, not less. Because people can only treat you how you teach them to. And when you teach them that your time, your mind, your presence has value, everything begins to change. You're not withdrawing from the world, you're choosing where to shine. And that choice, simple as it seems, is the beginning of something powerful. Your life, once ruled by obligation, starts to become your own. That's when everything changes. That change, the shift from reactive to intentional living, is subtle at first, but it compounds. You start noticing how much noise was in your life. Background notifications, group chats you don't care about, endless favors that didn't even come with a thank you. When you stop being constantly available, it's not just that people change, you change. You stop measuring your worth by how needed you are. You stop feeling guilty for resting. You begin to see that the people who truly care about you don't just want your availability, they want your well-being. There's a study from the University of California that tracked stress levels among people constantly exposed to digital interruptions, messages, calls, alerts. Their cortisol levels were significantly higher than those who allowed themselves to disconnect. Chronic availability leads to chronic stress. This is more than just being annoyed. Over time, it affects sleep, focus, even your immune system. One of the most misunderstood things about life is that busyness isn't the same as importance. People often say, "I'm just so busy," as if that's a badge of honor. But being busy for the sake of being needed by others is a fast track to losing yourself. When you reduce your availability, you regain clarity. Not every call needs to be answered. Not every event needs your presence. You begin to move from a place of intention, not guilt. Think about how many decisions you've made just to avoid disappointing someone. You said yes even when you were exhausted. You agreed to plans even when your soul needed stillness. And you told yourself that it was just easier this way. But that ease is temporary. The long-term effect is a diluted version of yourself, stretched too thin, too distracted to notice how much life is happening without you fully in it. When you stop being available all the time, it doesn't mean you're saying no to people. It means you're saying yes to yourself. And that's a yes we don't say often enough. In relationships, this change is even more revealing. People who are used to getting unlimited access to you might push back. Some will accuse you of being distant or cold. But don't confuse their discomfort with your mistake. Often it's not that you've changed, it's that your change exposes how unbalanced things were. When you stop showing up on command, people are forced to reassess how they treat you. Some of those reassessments will be uncomfortable. They'll ask, "Why isn't this person always available anymore?" And if they're honest, the answer might be, "Because I took them for granted." That kind of realization is powerful. It's the first step toward healthier, more respectful dynamics. In contrast, the people who really value you will adjust. They'll make space for your boundaries. They'll check in without expecting a response within minutes. They'll learn that you're still there, just not in the way that erases your own needs. It's worth mentioning that stopping your constant availability doesn't mean becoming cold or selfish. It doesn't mean you stop helping others. It just means your help comes from a full cup, not a drained one. You can be kind without being a doormat. You can be helpful without being used. And you can love others deeply without abandoning yourself in the process. Some of the most grounded people you'll meet have learned to say no without apology. They're not rude, they're clear, they don't rush to answer everything, they don't try to be everywhere. And ironically, people respect them more for it. Because deep down, everyone understands that presence without pressure feels different. It feels earned. It feels sincere. There's also something to be said about creativity in this space. When you're always available, your mind is in reaction mode. You're constantly switching tasks, constantly moving between other people's priorities. But when you step away from that, you enter a different mental state, one where ideas come more freely, where you start solving your own problems instead of constantly managing everyone else's. Think of the artists, writers, innovators you admire. Most of them protect their time like it's sacred, because it is. The best ideas don't come when you're knee-deep in notifications. They come when your brain has room to breathe. When you're unavailable to the noise, you become available to inspiration. Time is not just something you manage, it's something you spend. And every minute spent on something meaningless is a minute not spent on something that matters. When you stop being available to every call, every text, every event, you start investing in your own priorities. You build deeper focus. You finish things. You grow. One of the greatest myths we live under is that being needed is the same as being loved. But neediness can come from many places. Fear, insecurity, laziness. Love, on the other hand, respects space. It values autonomy. It doesn't collapse when you're offline for a while. If someone only values you when you're convenient, that's not love, that's access. And access can be revoked. As children, many of us were praised for being helpful, for being agreeable, and while those traits aren't wrong, they become dangerous when they're the only way we know how to be valued. If you've spent your life believing your worth comes from being there for others, it can be terrifying to step back. But here's the truth. You don't lose your worth when you set boundaries. You rediscover it. The world might not clap for you when you reclaim your time. In fact, it might push back. But what you gain is quiet, clarity, real connection, real rest, a life where you're not just reacting, you're choosing. The shift isn't loud. There's no grand announcement. You just stop picking up every call. Stop answering every text within seconds. Stop saying yes when your body is screaming no. And something magical happens. People start figuring things out on their own. You start realizing how strong you are without all the noise. And the best part, the relationships that remain, the ones that survive this change, are the ones worth keeping. They're based on something real, not obligation, not access, but mutual respect. In a world that profits from your constant engagement, your unavailability becomes a quiet form of rebellion, a way to say, my time is mine, my mind is not a public resource, my energy is not up for auction, my life is not lived to be consumed. And once you make peace with that, everything truly does change. Because you're not lost anymore in the lives of others, you've found your way back to your own. That's when you stop existing for others and start living for yourself. You begin to notice new rhythms in your day. Without the pull of constant demands, time feels different. Mornings stretch out. Evenings feel less rushed. Conversations become more intentional. When you're not darting from one interruption to the next, you can finally listen, not just to others, but to yourself, your own thoughts, your needs, your instincts. And those instincts, which were once drowned out by external noise, start guiding you again. People often say they want peace, but very few are willing to make the changes required to have it. Because peace usually requires boundaries. It requires saying no. It requires disappointing people who are used to getting yes. And that's hard, especially if you've built your identity around making others happy. But here's something to think about. Being everything for everyone usually means being almost nothing for yourself. You can't be fully present in your own life when you're constantly managing someone else's. When you reduce your availability, you give yourself room to be the main character in your own story again, not just a supporting role in everyone else's. That's not to say you cut people off or disappear. It means you become more deliberate. You become the person who shows up because you want to, not because you feel like you have to. You start responding on your time, not out of reflex. And your presence, once taken for granted, starts to mean something again. Something profound also happens in your sense of self. You stop asking questions like, do they like me? And start asking, do I enjoy being around them? You stop obsessing over whether you're being useful and start wondering if you're being respected. These are subtle changes in perspective, but they transform the way you move through the world. When you're less available, people are more mindful of your time. The conversations become less about convenience and more about connection. You're no longer the person they call at 2 a.m. just because they're bored or lonely. You're the person they reach out to with intention, with respect. In the long term, this shift improves your mental health. You start noticing how much of your stress wasn't from work or traffic or bills. It was from people, from constantly managing emotional labor that wasn't yours to carry. Once you step away from that dynamic, your anxiety begins to ease. Your thoughts become clearer. You sleep better. Your body relaxes in ways it hasn't for years. There's a Japanese concept called ma, which refers to the space between things. Silence between musical notes, a pause in conversation, an intentional gap. Ma teaches that meaning is found not only in what we do, but in the spaces we protect. When you stop being constantly available, you create those spaces. You let silence exist. You allow yourself to sit with your thoughts instead of always reacting to others. In those spaces, you begin to notice what you actually enjoy, what matters to you, the people who make you feel lighter, not heavier, the things you've been doing just to keep others happy, and the things you've abandoned that once made you feel alive. It's like your life had a volume dial turned up too loud, and for the first time, you're turning it down and hearing your own voice. And with that clarity comes confidence, the quiet kind, not loud or performative, but rooted. You don't need to over-explain your choices. You don't need to rush back to every text to prove you care. The people who know your heart won't demand proof. They'll feel it in how you show up when it matters, not how often, but how fully. Availability isn't the same as presence. You can be around all the time and still be emotionally distant. You can reply to every message and still feel disconnected. But when you stop giving your energy away constantly, the times you do engage carry more depth, more meaning. You're not stretched thin, so you bring your full self to the table. Even in romantic relationships, this shift matters. Love that requires constant access isn't sustainable. A healthy relationship thrives on mutual respect, not constant checking in. When both people have space to breathe, to grow, to be alone when needed, the relationship becomes stronger, not weaker. There's trust in that space, there's maturity. And without that space, people lose themselves. They forget who they are outside of the we. We're not taught how to do this. We're taught to be available, polite, agreeable. But there's a deeper kind of politeness, the kind that includes yourself in the equation. You start honoring your limits. You stop overextending. You stop saying, "Sure, I'll figure it out," when what you really mean is, "I'm exhausted." Some people won't like this new version of you. That's okay. You're not for everyone. You never were. And the sooner you stop trying to be, the sooner you find the people who are aligned with who you are, not just what you can offer. Your value has never come from being available. It has always come from your uniqueness, your insight, your presence when you choose to be present. When you stop being available all the time, your value doesn't decrease, it becomes visible. It's not about building walls, it's about building doors. And deciding who gets a key. Not everyone deserves unlimited access. Not everyone respects it. And giving away your energy to people who don't honor it will leave you resentful, tired, and disconnected from yourself. There's a quiet power in choosing when and where you show up. A strength in walking away from dynamics that only function when you're bending over backwards. You learn to live more from the inside out, not from obligation, but from intention. You no longer feel the need to justify your boundaries. You don't debate your decisions in your head for hours. You trust yourself. That trust, in your own rhythm, in your own timing, is the foundation of peace. And peace doesn't always look like stillness. Sometimes peace looks like pruning, cutting back, saying less, showing up less, not because you don't care, but because you care about things that are finally aligned with your values. You become more focused, more rooted, less reactive. You begin living a life that's quiet but not empty, selective but not lonely, small in noise but rich in meaning. So when you stop being available all the time, what changes? Not just your calendar, not just your relationships. You change. You become whole again. The version of you that existed before all the overcommitting, the guilt, the performing. You come home to yourself. And from that place, everything else, the right people, the right work, the right moments, begins to flow. Not forced, not chased, just allowed. That's when everything truly begins. There's something profoundly liberating about reclaiming your time and attention, not in a loud, rebellious way, but in a quiet, steady way, the kind that builds momentum over time. It starts with you asking one question: what am I giving my life to, and is it giving anything back? When you stop being constantly available, you start noticing all the ways you've been fragmented, pulled in 100 directions, attending to everyone else's urgency while your own needs gather dust in the background. You start remembering things you used to feel passionate about, things you left behind, not because you stopped caring, but because there was never enough time. Because you gave that time away piece by piece. One of the most surprising things that happens when you reduce your availability is how much your perception of time changes. An hour alone feels like a gift again. A quiet weekend feels like a reset, not a punishment. You find that boredom, something we've come to fear, isn't actually emptiness, it's space. And in that space, your creativity comes back, your energy comes back. You stop surviving and start living again. And with that clarity, you begin to make better decisions, not faster decisions, better ones. You're no longer rushing to respond, to please, to perform. You're assessing, thinking, feeling. You realize that urgency is often artificial, that people's emergencies are not always your responsibility, that pausing doesn't make you unkind, it makes you wise. You also begin to draw a line between connection and consumption. Not everyone who reaches out wants to connect. Some just want to take. They want your attention, your energy, your time, but not your well-being. When you start saying no to those dynamics, you stop feeling used. You stop feeling like you're constantly running on empty. And then something beautiful happens: reciprocity. When you stop pouring into relationships that only drain you, you make space for those that nourish you, for people who check in without needing something, who listen without turning the conversation back to themselves, who celebrate your boundaries instead of challenging them. Those relationships feel different. They're slower, steadier, deeper, built on mutual care, not codependency. You don't have to perform to keep them. You don't have to be on all the time. You can just be, and that's enough. In many ways, this entire shift is about dignity. It's about refusing to trade your peace for approval, refusing to be available simply to avoid conflict, refusing to say yes because you're afraid of being seen as difficult. It's about standing in the truth that your life is not a public service. It's your one short, precious opportunity to be who you are. And being who you are takes time. It takes solitude, it takes reflection. You can't access those things when you're constantly plugged into everyone else's needs. Think of a great tree, rooted, expansive, quiet. It doesn't chase sunlight. It doesn't bend to every breeze. It grows from within. That's what happens when you become less available. You grow from the inside out. You deepen your roots. You rise in a way that's steady, not frantic. This isn't about rejecting people. It's about returning to yourself. People may not always understand your shift. Some may take it personally. But that's not your burden to carry. Your responsibility is to your wholeness, to your peace, to the life you're quietly building behind the scenes. Because in the end, no one else is responsible for your well-being. That's your job, and it's one of the most important jobs you'll ever have. When you stop being available to everything and everyone, you begin being available to what truly matters, to the people who love you for more than your usefulness, to the work that lights you up, to the silence that teaches you, to the rest that restores you. You become more than just a response to someone else's request. You become a presence that is felt, not just seen, a life that is lived, not just managed. And slowly, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you've stopped making yourself small to fit into it. You've stopped emptying yourself to fill everyone else. You've made space, and in that space, life can finally meet you where you are. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're stretched thin and overlooked, if you're tired of being the one who always shows up while others sit back, try stepping away. Not forever, just long enough to remember what your own life feels like. You'll be amazed at what and who remains. and even more amazed by what begins.